I remember the exact sound my name made in his mouth that day. Not warm, not proud, heavy, accusing. "You left us with nothing," he said, standing in my doorway like he had every right to be there. I didn't answer right away. I could hear my own breathing, slow and controlled, the way you breathe when you're trying not to let the past rush back all at once. My hand was still on the door handle. I hadn't invited him in. I hadn't decided anything yet. What I wanted to say came fast, sharp, years of it. But what actually came out surprised even me. "I built my life," I said quietly, feeling the weight of every word. "But it cost more than you'll ever know." That was the moment I understood this conversation wasn't about blame anymore. It was about everything we never said, and what saying it now might finally take from me. I grew up learning how to be quiet about certain things, not because they didn't hurt, but because talking about them didn't change anything. In our house, absence was normal. It had a shape, a weight. My father wasn't there, and that fact sat in every room like an extra piece of furniture no one acknowledged. My mother did everything she could to make our life feel stable. She worked long hours, sometimes 2 jobs, always tired in a way that sleep never fixed. She carried responsibility like it was part of her spine. I learned early not to ask for much, not because she wouldn't try, but because I could see the cost in her eyes when she said yes. We lived in a neighborhood where people knew your name but not your dreams. Most of the men I saw growing up looked exhausted long before they were old. Some disappeared. Some stayed, but checked out. I didn't have a model for what I was supposed to become as a man, only examples of what survival looked like. School became my quiet escape, not because I loved it at first, but because it offered rules that made sense. Effort led somewhere. Time mattered. I learned how to focus, how to wait, how to move forward without applause. I didn't talk much about my father. When people asked, I kept it short. "He's not around." That sentence did enough work on its own. As I got older, the absence hardened into something more complicated. It wasn't just that he wasn't there. It was that I started to imagine what his presence might have changed. Would I have been less cautious, less angry, less determined to prove something I couldn't even name? Those questions followed me quietly into adulthood. I paid my own way through most things, took jobs that didn't fit my age, learned how to sit across from people who underestimated me and let them. I watched friends give up when life got heavy, and I understood why. Responsibility comes early when no one is catching you if you fall. By the time I built something that looked like success from the outside, a career, a home, a sense of direction, I had already made peace with the idea that it was mine alone. No inheritance, no guidance passed down, just choices, consequences, and the slow accumulation of effort. That's why seeing him at my door didn't feel like a reunion. It felt like the past testing whether I had really moved on, or just learned how to carry it better. The incident that changed everything didn't arrive with drama. It came quietly, the way real life often does, wrapped in something practical. A phone call, a neutral voice, information delivered without emotion. My father had been sick. Not suddenly, not tragically, just long enough for it to matter. Long enough for choices to surface. I remember sitting at my kitchen table after the call, my coffee going cold. I didn't feel panic. I felt interruption. The life I had built was orderly, intentional, every piece earned. And suddenly, a man who had been absent for decades was back on the edge of it, not asking for forgiveness, not even asking for help yet, just existing again in a way that demanded space. A few days later, he reached out himself. The message was brief, no apology, no explanation, just a request to talk. I stared at my phone longer than I cared to admit. There was a time when I had imagined this moment, rehearsed speeches I would never give. But standing there as an adult, with responsibilities and routines, I realized something uncomfortable. Ignoring him now was a choice too. We met at a small diner off the highway, the kind of place that survives on regulars and habit. He looked older than I expected, thinner. Time had done its work on him. The conversation stayed shallow at first. Weather, work, generalities. Then he said my name the way he always had, like it belonged to someone he used to know. He talked about his life in fragments, missed chances, bad decisions, things that didn't work out. He didn't say he was sorry. He didn't say he had tried. He spoke like someone explaining a long detour, not an absence. And I realized then that this wasn't going to be the reckoning I had imagined. The real turning point came when he asked about my success, not with pride, with confusion, as if my life contradicted the version of the story he had been telling himself all these years. I told him the truth, about working young, about learning responsibility early, about building a life without guidance. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I just spoke plainly. That's when his expression changed. Something defensive surfaced, and then he said it, not cruelly, almost casually. "You left us with nothing," he said, as if I had been the one who walked away. That sentence landed harder than anything else, because in that moment, I saw how differently we remembered the same years. To him, survival had blurred into justification. To me, absence had shaped everything. I didn't respond right away. I paid the bill. I stood up. I told him we would talk again, but only if we were both willing to be honest. As I walked out, I understood that reconnecting with him wasn't about closure. It was about confronting a truth I had avoided. Success doesn't erase history, and some conversations can't be postponed without consequence. After that meeting, my life didn't explode, but it started to feel crowded in places that had always been quiet. His words stayed with me. Not the accusation itself, but how easily it came to him, how natural it felt for him to shift the weight of absence onto a child who had grown up. He began calling more often, not consistently, not responsibly, just enough to disrupt my sense of balance. Some days he sounded reflective, almost gentle. Other days, defensive and sharp, like he was bracing for an attack that hadn't come yet. Every conversation left me unsettled, replaying sentences long after the call ended. I told myself I was engaging out of maturity, that this was what growth looked like, facing uncomfortable history instead of pretending it didn't exist. But beneath that reasoning was something less noble, a quiet hope that maybe, if I stayed present long enough, he would finally see me. Not as a reminder of his failures, but as a man who had built something real. That hope cost me more than I expected. I started second-guessing my own memories, wondering if I had exaggerated the emptiness of those years. If maybe my mother had shielded me from more than I realized. If absence could be reframed as struggle instead of choice. At the same time, my own life began to feel the strain. Work deadlines slipped. I found myself distracted in conversations, emotionally elsewhere. The structure I relied on, routine, order, predictability, started to crack under the pressure of unresolved history. I didn't talk about it much. People assume success comes with emotional clarity. It doesn't. Sometimes it just gives you better places to hide confusion. When I finally brought up the past directly, the conversation didn't go the way I imagined. I didn't accuse him. I didn't list grievances. I spoke calmly, deliberately, about what it was like growing up without him. The missed milestones, the silence, the way responsibility arrived before I was ready. He listened, but not the way I needed. His responses circled back to himself, to what he had been going through, to how hard things were. He framed his absence as inevitability, not decision. And every time he did, something inside me tightened. Because understanding hardship is not the same as excusing abandonment. The tension between us grew subtle but constant. Conversations became negotiations. What could be said? What would be minimized? What would be redirected? I caught myself softening my words, protecting him from discomfort he had never protected me from. That realization unsettled me more than his original accusation ever had. The final pressure point came when he suggested we start over. Those were his words, start over. As if history could be reset by intention alone, as if the years I spent building myself in his absence were a draft that could be revised. I didn't answer him right away. I felt the weight of a decision forming, heavy and unavoidable. Continuing this relationship as it was meant, carrying his unfinished work alongside my own life. Ending it meant accepting that some gaps never close. Either way, something was going to change. And for the first time, I understood that avoiding the pain of the past had started to threaten the stability of the present. The moment everything came to a head wasn't loud. It didn't happen in public. It happened in my living room, late in the evening, when the day had already taken most of my defenses with it. He was sitting across from me, hands folded, eyes moving around the room like he was taking inventory of a life he hadn't helped build. He told me he was proud of me. The words should have landed softly. Instead, they felt unfinished, like a sentence that needed an ending he wasn't ready to give. Then he said it again, this time more clearly, that he felt left behind, that my success made him feel small, that when he said I left them with nothing, what he meant was that I had moved on without him. Something in me finally shifted. Not anger, not relief, clarity. I realized he wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was asking for relief, from guilt, from responsibility, from the weight of what he hadn't done. And he wanted that relief without facing the full truth. I told him I didn't build my life to punish him. I built it because no one else was going to do it for me. I told him that every choice I made came with consequences, and so did his absence. That both things could be true at the same time. For the first time, I didn't soften my words. I didn't rush to protect his feelings. I spoke slowly, deliberately, the way you do when you know there's no coming back from what you're about to say. I told him that starting over wasn't possible without honesty. And honesty meant acknowledging that he had left, and that it had shaped everything. He went quiet, not reflective, guarded, and in that silence, I understood something painful but necessary. He was incapable of giving me what I had waited for all these years. Not because he didn't care, but because facing that truth would cost him more than he was willing to pay. I stood up before the conversation could circle back into excuses. I told him this didn't mean I hated him. It meant I respected myself enough to stop carrying what wasn't mine. When he left, the door closing behind him didn't feel like loss. It felt like the end of a negotiation I had been stuck in since childhood. And I knew, with a certainty that surprised me, that whatever came next would be built on something real, even if it meant walking forward without him. In the weeks that followed, the quiet returned, but it was different this time. It wasn't the silence of waiting or wondering. It was the kind that comes after a decision has settled into your bones. I didn't replay the conversation the way I used to. I let it stand as it was, complete. My father reached out once more after that night. A short message, no accusation, No apology either. I didn't respond right away. Not out of punishment, but out of honesty. I needed to feel what my life was like without managing his emotions alongside my own. What surprised me was how familiar that feeling was. I had done it before, for most of my life. I thought about my mother often during that time, about the way she carried responsibility without complaint, about how she never framed struggle as something we were owed praise for. She just did what needed to be done. Her example had shaped me more than I ever gave her credit for. Stability, I realized, isn't inherited. It's practiced. Nothing dramatic happened after that. No reconciliation, no final break either. Just distance, intentional and clean. I learned that boundaries don't have to be loud to be firm. They don't require anger to be real. Sometimes they're simply the shape your life takes when you stop making room for unfinished business. My success didn't feel different after the confrontation, but my relationship to it did. It no longer felt like proof. It felt like memory, a record of choices made under pressure, of responsibility assumed early, of a life built without shortcuts. I stopped measuring it against what he could or couldn't see. I still carry my past with me. That doesn't change. But it no longer leans forward, demanding resolution. It sits where it belongs, behind me, informing my steps without directing them. I've learned that you can honor where you came from without reopening every wound. Some stories don't end with repair. They end with understanding, with acceptance, with the quiet responsibility of deciding what you will and will not carry forward. This is my real-life experience, not a victory over someone else, but a choice to live truthfully. And in that choice, I finally left nothing unfinished.